Hi y'all, this is the fourth segment in the Accessing Earth Engine Data in Web Application series. In the last segment, we built a dynamic UI framework to request datasets from Earth Engine that we filtered by date, applied vision parameters, and displayed on the map. In this segment, we will add graphing capabilities to our UI. To do this, we will also have to add two new routes to our server side, one to get the available bands for an image collection, the next to get the values for the selected parameters. To avoid having to type all of the new lines of code, I have created a branch in the GitHub repo where you can copy and paste from or simply clone and check out the branch step_4_graphing. The link to the repo is in the description below. Let's jump right in. I have cloned the repo and checked out the branch. We're going to start with the server-side code and look at get available bands. The purpose of this is to find out what bands are available for an image or an image collection so the user can choose from a list in the UI. This also could be used to help a user build their vision parameters for an image or an image collection to give them the available bands to choose from. There are multiple ways to do this logic, and of course it can be done directly in app.py without creating an utility method, but to keep things simple and consistent, we will create a method in utilities. Here you can see this is a very similar fashion as we did in the mean image byte collection. Up here we got the JSON from the request. That's the same thing we're doing. We're getting the JSON from the request. We're checking for two different parameters. We're checking for image collection and for image. Only one should be sent, depending on if you're sending an image or an image collection. Here you can see we check if image collection name is none. If it is, we assume that they have sent image, and we pass in the image name, and we pass in true that it is an image. Otherwise, we use the image collection name and pass in false, saying that it's an image collection. In a production environment, you'd want to do more validation than we've done here. So let's look at list available bands. It's a very short method here. Basically it says if it's an image, all we need to do is create image from the image name. Otherwise, we create a collection from the name that's sent in, and then we just take the first image from there, which again is an image. And then from there we create the return object, which has the key of bands and image name, and in the bands we just use the image and we call the band name function, and then we call getInfo to get the list of them. And the name is simply the name that was sent in. Back in app.py, you can see that the return value is set to values, and then values is wrapped in JSONify and returned to the client. Before we look at the client code, let's look at the other new route we have here, time series index. So we have the function here, time series index, which is doing the same thing as before. It's taking the JSON from the request and it's looking for the parameters. It's looking for geometry and collection name time series. And you can also see over here that there are other parameters that are not required. And if they're not required, it will fill them in for us using default values. Then it will call this new function get time series by collection and index that we've created over here. And you can see the basic concept of this is it sets a geometry variable to none, and it checks the chords that were sent in sub-0 to see if it's a list. If it's a list, we assume that it's a polygon. If it's not a list, we assume that it's a point. Then we check to see if there's an index name. If there is an index name, then we can build the image collection from the name. We can filter by to and from date, and then we can select the index name. And the index name is like a band. Otherwise, we just do the same thing. We don't select the index. And this is a function that we're going to use to map. You can see it's being called here in the map function. And every image is passed through here in the collection. And what we're doing here is we're building the reducer. We're using eval to build the reducer with whatever is sent in the reducer. If reducer is none, then we just automatically make it mean. If there's a index name, we are, again, we're just selecting that index. We're also reducing the region, which gets the value of the pixels, and we're also clipping to the geometry. And if there isn't an index name, we do the same thing, except we don't get that particular band. And here, we're returning each image, and we're setting the index value with the value of the index, but we're also getting the number of the date. And then in here, this is where we're mapping to that. So here's where we're saying all the images go to this function and go through here. And when that gets returned, it aggregates that array that it's returned by the index value, and we call getInfo to get the JSON object, which goes in time series, and then we return that back here to values, and this is exactly the same thing that you've seen before. We just wrap it in JSONify and send it back to the client. Alright, now to the client-side code. Not too much has changed here in index. You can see that we've added the chart utils, and we've added HiCharts, which is a charting library. There are many different charting libraries. This is just one that we've chosen to use today. And the only other change we've made is we've removed coming soon and made this time series index. Next to chart utils, we have two functions here. One is create chart, and basically we just send in a text and we send in the actual data for the time series for this. And this is just a basic HiCharts configuration. We tell it which container that we want it to target. We can put a title text in here. We're not actually doing that. You can see there's actually opportunity to have other parameters in here and sending stuff like the title text. There's also different things you could send in. For example, here you can see that we've hard-coded the units of measure, and obviously you would not want to hard-code millimeters in for all of your units of measure. Also, the type we've hard-coded in line. You might want a different kind of chart. For this particular demo, we're just doing a line chart, and same thing with the color. You could pass in the color and do that all dynamically as well. But you can see we're just passing in that data. We're just setting it to data. We're setting the name as the text, and we're also setting the title of the y-axis of the text. So the other function is the load bands, which does exactly what it says. It removes any options that are in the band selector first, and then it grabs the image name, sends that in the image collection parameter. We're just doing image collection in this particular demo here, but as you saw on the server side, we could do either image or image collection. And then we're just making an AJAX call to the server side. And you can see here, when we get that back, we grab bands out of the band key that we put it in, and then we basically just loop through all of these and we create an option that we're adding to this select. Okay, so now we're going to look at IMapUtils, and the reason we have to add to IMapUtils is because our route that we added takes a polygon or a point as one of the parameters, so we have to add the interaction to the map so the user can draw either a polygon or point. We're actually just going to use polygon for this demo, but it's the same workflow here. So you can see basically it starts with draw polygon start, and we hide the modal that the user is interacting with to fill out the parameters. We add the interaction of polygon, and again, this is where you could use either like a circle or a point or any of the other drawing methods. And then that interaction we do here, we remove the draw layer if the draw layer exists, and we create a new source and we call this draw layer. And we're adding this to a vector layer, and we add that vector layer to the map. And then we add a draw interaction, and the type here, which is what we've just passed in as polygon, and we add that to the map. And then we add a draw end event, and here's our draw end event, which is right here. So in this draw end event, we remove the interaction. So there might be a case that you want multiple polygons drawn in an application. You wouldn't want to remove the interaction between draws at the end of each draw if that is your goal, but our goal is just to have them draw one polygon. So then we have to transform the geometry. The geometry of the map is different than the geometry that they create the polygons in, so we just have to do a simple transform here and we get the geometry. Here's where we check to see if it's a multi-polygon or a polygon. We really don't need to do this for this demo, but there's some extra code in there that you can use if there's a multi-polygon. We're always just going to have a single polygon in ours. Then we're going to stringify the polygon so it can go to the draw polygon text box. It's there, so you can actually, the user can actually see the polygon that they've drawn in the JSON version. And then we're going to go ahead and show the modal again. Now over to EarthEngineDemo.js. So the new function here is time series index. No surprise, I'm sure. It's exactly the same as the others. It's got the name of the function that matches what is being called. It builds the JSON from the parameters in the form. It uses AJAX to call the server side. And then here is where it's a little bit different because we're calling create chart, but as you saw in create chart function, it needs a name and the data. And here's the data that we're sending it and the name that we're, that we have hard coded. Let's look what we did in UI Utils. You can see in the load parameter panel, we've replaced the coming soon with the time series index. We get the draw geometry button. Let's take a look at that. And this is exactly the same. It's a form group with a label, and here's the button that on click calls the draw poly start, and that starts the whole draw procedure. The next thing that it gets is the image name with band selector UI. In here we've got a form group, we've got the image name, we have a button that on click loads bands, and that's what makes the AJAX call from the image name that's placed in this text field here. And then when the images come back from the AJAX call, this is the select that I mentioned before with the ID band selector, and it fills that with the options that it dynamically builds from the server. Let's double check what it gets next, but I think it's reducer UI. It is not. So the next thing is the from date UI and the to date UI. We actually don't have to look at those because they're exactly the same as the mean image by collection. Same exact stuff that they're getting there. This is where it becomes reusable and dynamic. So the next thing we do look at is the get reducer UI, and then after that is the get scale UI. We can look at both of those at the same time. So the reducer, again, form group with a label, and then a select with just the options of min, max, and mean. Those are the reducers that are available, that we're making available. And then the scale, this is just a simple input with a label in a form group. We could do something different and make this a number field. There's a lot of different ways you could do it, but we're just doing it an open text field for now. Okay, so here's the UI that we've built. It doesn't look much different except it doesn't say coming soon over here. Everything's the same. It's got the test route. You can put an image on there automatically. We can get our mean image collection. We won't do that right now. We'll just go to the time series index. And here's the draw polygon button. We click this. It lets us go ahead and draw a polygon. And we'll choose chirps daily. We'll load bands. There's only one band. It's precipitation. We'll put in a start date of 01/01/2014. We'll put an end date of 01/31/2014. And then we'll get the mean, and we'll pick the scale of 600, and we'll hit submit. And it went and got the data values for the graph, and it graphed them. So let's do another one. And let's do chirps. And let's say we want 01/01/2014. And let's say we want the whole year. 2/31/2014. And we want the mean. And let's go ahead and submit that. And you can see it went and got the entire year's worth of values for the chirps. All right, that's all I have for this segment of accessing Earth Engine data in web applications. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.